to the September 12th, 2025 Club Cubase live stream. My name is Greg Undo, and I'm the host of the live stream today. If you have not attended a live stream before, how it works is you can simply ask your questions by typing it into the chat field, or questions can be sent in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. When asking questions, realize that my ability to answer questions in kind of a real-time manner may soon be eclipsed. As we go through a number of questions, we will go through all the questions chronologically as asked. But if you don't see an immediate response to your question, if we could avoid asking the same questions over and over again, that would be appreciated. Clear my throat. We should have an index of all of the topics that are covered in today's live stream pinned to the top of the comments field several hours after the live stream ends. But if you wanted to search for topics, there's over 41,000 topics that have been covered in previous Club Cubase live streams. You can go to cubaseindex.com. We want to thank Jan from Stockholm for creating the wonderful site so you could just search. We have two people that serve as moderators. So we have Agent K and Jazz Dude. They're not Steinberg employees. They just really do it kind of to make it a better community experience. We want to give a special thanks to them. And also Jazz Dude will get a special kudos for his work with the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord. It's a wonderful resource of information for the Steinberg community. So once again, my name is Greg Undo. I work for Yamaha Corporation of America. And I'm presenting from in the United States, outside of Washington, D.C. area. In Alexandria, Virginia. If you're watching this live, please feel free to introduce yourself. And with that, we will go ahead and get started. All right, so you see from Watch Addicts 12 says, hello, Mark Meter. Mark Metter, like double header. Thanks for the, it says Little Rock, Arkansas. Says Cubase 13 opens with a not connected audio and two plugins each load. You left stereo instead of stereo out. You asked what interface. It's a Steinberg UR824 switched on before Cubase is opened. How do I save the audio connection and have plugins open to stereo out? So it could be like when you go to make sure that when you go to add a particular, I'm not sure if it's instrument tracks, but right here, if I go to add in an instrument track, so let's say I go to add a pad shop, and if this here is set, like when we go to add an instrument track, if this is set to like my left output here, and when I go to add the retrolog, the pad shop track, that it's going to only be added on that particular channel. So if we add another instrument track, so let's say, and if I don't change that setting, so let's say I open up a backbone instead, at that point, when we go to our backbone, we can see that that particular routing is preserved. So maybe if it's, and just make sure, so I'm not sure if it's if you see it as going directly to the stereo out there, or if it's only going out of the stereo output of your audio interface. But make sure when you go to add an instrument track that the audio outputs, that you do the routing set correctly there on when you go to add a particular track. And tell me if that is, if you wanted to check that. Mark Metter. All right. So we see last issue, same 2015, but in my home studio, although I'm opening a zillion.dmg file since 2016. About a year ago, this Mac ceased being able to open them. It will open package files, zip, and a host of others. I checked Grok for answer. There is a large village of people with the same problem. Workaround is entering specific code into terminal app. It says, I hate code, but it worked. Next problem, the Cubase project downloader opens, begins to run, then error message, internet connection can't be established. I'm clearly online streaming stuff, so my internet connection is fine. Terminal found at Cubase 14.dmg as whole and or not corrupt installed to product installer. How do you get past the no internet connect error. So what you could do, let's just open up a web browser. If you just search for like, Cubase 14 installers. So if you're using the Steinberg download assistant, I just Googled Cubase 14 installers, and then there's on the web page, you also have Cubase 14 downloads. And once you're over here, you could just simply download all of the different components. So whether you're running, your Mac OS. So at this point, we could just download, and we'll see what the file type is as we're downloading it. We'll just watch this here. Bear with me a second. All right, so that's a DMG file there. But, try, just out of curiosity, if you go to this page and just download the installers manually and see if that helps your situation, Mark. Sorry, you're having issues, but just out of curiosity, what Mac OS you have as well. All right, so we have Tim K. Tim K joining from Zeiss, Netherlands. His cat buddy is waving a paw. Hello to all the other pets. All right, from Nest we have, hi Greg, hope everything is going well. Question, when I use warp in an event, I see yellow vertical stripes. Is that related to quantize? So generally when we go to warp a particular event, the warping is going to occur at warp markers, like if we're doing free warp. So a lot of times what we could do is, let's say if I have a drum loop here and we go into like our hit points. So let's say I just kind of find my hit points here. We adjust kind of our sensitivity. At this point, I could create warp markers from the little create tab. Okay, so now when I do this, we could create the warp markers. When I have my free warp tool selected, we now see these are the points, kind of the transient points that we could use to just kind of change. So these are the markers that we use. And if you needed to manually add a warp marker, say like right there, you could just click. And now, like when this is selected, and you see that as I move the warp tool, when we are in free warp mode, so we see the yellow lines, but as I have that warp tool selected, and if I kind of approach something like from the right going towards the left, we'll see this yellow line turn white, and that means that is kind of the active warp marker. And then I could just simply do free warping on that particular warp marker. So basically when we do free warping, we're just kind of moving the particular warp marker, and that's kind of generally going to be at a rhythmically significant transient, or we could manually enter them in, or if you needed to erase one, it's just hold down the Alt or Option key and click with the warp tool, and then you could erase. But that's with those yellow vertical lines. Now if we did audio quantize, if we set our quantize value here to 1/8 notes, and we have the audio warp activated here, when we quantize a particular audio file, we can now see that all those events can move based on our quantize values here. So those can be used to quantize the audio, but also when we're in free warp mode, you could just make little rhythmic adjustments to make sure that the accuracy is higher for rhythms. So let me know if that makes sense. All right, wonderful to see Jan from CubaseIndex.com. We see Yassine Trabiz is joining the stream from the Netherlands. Thanks for being online with us. Hope you're well. We see Fly V Vince from Winnipeg, Canada. Uno Memento joining from Finland. All right, VS Terranova joining from Amsterdam. Soren joining from Sweden. All right, so we see Flyv says he's happy this custom Facebook page got a verified check. That's great to hear. All right, we see Rick France from the Pacific Northwest, and we have Don't Look, Listen Modular saying hello. All right, Jan is giving kudos to Jazz Dude for this fantastic super Cubase forum, the unofficial Cubase Nation Discord. All right, Kordash asks, how can I find a tutorial for hip-hop mix mastering? So generally there isn't going to be like, I would say, for mastering in general, that there's not going to be genre-specific mastering. If you want to send a track for me, I could run it through Wavelab or Cubase if you want to show some mastering techniques. But generally what people are going to do and kind of, let me just see if I can build something super fast. It will be completely inauthentic hip hop. So let me just All right, so I notice I think I'm missing some files here. Let me just using some of the older instruments, but let me see if I can replace one quickly here. Right, so generally, what a lot of people, and really could depend on kind of what your definition of mastering is. So let me just see if I get this track to follow the chord track quickly. All right, so let's say if we are going to be doing like some mastering, some really basic stuff that you would probably do, and this doesn't make any sense musically, but if you wanted to come over, let's say do like a little bit of frequency EQ, so if you wanted to kind of come over here. Then you could also kind of have like a dynamic EQ. So let's say if we have, I wanted to take that particular band. So let's say go to band 5 and we could activate kind of a dynamic EQ. where we're just kind of compressing those particular frequencies. Then if you wanted to run it through like some different dynamics processing, maybe like a multi-band compressor, and you get some different presets here. So say, okay, we just want to do, so you could do these on kind of some individual, but say we'll do, or if you wanted to come over another one that we could do that could be helpful for hip hop stuff. Could be like Squasher is a good one. So you could come over here. And if you wanted to make it sound a little wider, we could come over, you know. So just a couple of things that you could do to kind of increase the gain. So if we come over here, you know, so check out like multi-band dynamics, you know, running perhaps, even if you go to the channel strip here, if you want to do some saturation. So if we bypass kind of all of these particular plugins, except I want to run it through like a tube compressor here. And I want to run it through like an envelope shaper to get more attack. And maybe let's run it through like tape saturation, or we can choose to run it through Magneto too. And a limiter. So there's all sorts of great internal processing. So mastering could be, in some people's perceptions, just running, you know, processing an individual track, or it could be, you know, processing a collection of tracks so that there's kind of cohesion when you're, you know, so they all kind of sound the same and gel together. So those are a couple things that you could try out. All right. But if you have a particular track that you want, I'd be happy to kind of do some stuff on, you know, on the live stream if that works with copyright and stuff like that. All right. So we see Bratman Studio Rick checking in from another Friday of overcast skies in Southern California in Whittier, saying hello to everyone. Always wonderful to see Jazz Dude on. We see Tim Weinheimer from Mission Viejo, California. We see Jason Sykes from South Yorkshire, England. All right. Pure T says, hi, why is my VST showing in Cubase 5 but not showing in Cubase 13? So between Cubase and 5 and 13, so by default, if it's a 32-bit plugin, 32-bit plugins are no longer supported. There are some third-party solutions. So a lot of the plugins that people were running in the Cubase 5 era are, you know, are 32-bit. So if there's a plugin that's, you know, from that era, most Cubase 5 plugins are 32-bit. So you could find a 64-bit counterpart. Also, VST3 had started around version 4. So if it's a VST2 plugin, you may have to enable it in, I believe it should kind of load up, but make sure that when you go to your studio setup, or I'm sorry, to your plugin, VST plugin manager, you'll see like the little info line here, and then you could activate your path for VST2 plugins. So a lot of plugins, you know, because Cubase 5 came out 2006-ish, so it's almost 20 years old now. You know, a lot of those plugins are kind of outdated, and they've been migrated to the more contemporary systems of VST3 and 64-bit as well. right, uno momento wants people to whack the like button. Okay, so we see Watch Addicts 12 says, yeah, thanks, Greg. My problem's resolved thanks to you. Monterey is my OS. I'm glad we hope got you sorted. All right, so Rob Schmedeke says, how do I turn off the routing of an audio track that is being sent to my UR44C reverb and looping back into my channel? The inspector under my send tab, I see RevX, which I don't want. So a lot of times with the UR44, if you're kind of hearing reverb, it's not necessarily from the input. So let's say I'll activate this particular project here, and we'll add an audio track, and we're going to set it specifically to one that okay, so we'll just choose our hardware here. And then we make sure direct monitoring is enabled. Okay, so now when I come over here, you'll see like your UR44C. So generally, unless you have activated this send, you're not going to hear the RevX. Now what happens a lot is if you go to your studio, you'll see like a hardware setup. Let me see if it might be under more options on the UR44. So you might see like a function here for hardware setup in the studio menu, I think on the UR44C. And then once you open that up, you'll see like a little tab. So where you'll see like kind of the RevX reverb, and then you have two knobs that you could adjust the RevX reverb. So sometimes it may get stuck in a mode where the reverb is constantly on. So try going to the studio menu, to the hardware setup, hardware manager, something along that terminology, and then you'll see two tabs. I think you want to click on the tab, the second tab, and then you'll see a knob for the reverb level. Just send that off. But if this isn't turned on, you shouldn't hear the reverb. So that's how it would be turned off. But check in the studio menu and see if you could find like that hardware manager, hardware setup, something along those lines. Great to see you on, Rob from Tarpon Springs, Florida. Which people tell me is like a bit of Greece in Florida. All right, so we see Val checking in for Cubase. All right. We see John Costigan joining from Kenosha, Wisconsin. All right, we have Nikolaus Unic says, love your videos. Is Steinberg's planning a splice integration? So I think there's already like a VST3 plugin, so you could do the routing. And generally, we don't really kind of promote stuff until it's released, so I can't really comment on future developments. And sometimes they just don't tell me because they know I talk to thousands of people every week. All right, so we see Gulf Coast Florida Man says opinions/reviews on PreSonus Arc 12 analog plus digital mixer. So yeah, maybe I've never played around with it, but maybe if other people have, if they could comment for Gulf Coast Florida Man. All right, so we see from Watch Addicts 12 says, except that to note, all clear in the left, stereo fix to stereo, but what about the not connected? So check, like when you're, I guess it's is it the not connected, with the audio interface or not connected, so let me just jump back here real quick. Okay, so we see, so it says, so you have the UR824 switched it on before Cubase is open. How do I save the audio connections and have plugins open to stereo out? So, have you tried, just out of curiosity, once you have it set up, to save it as a template So if you just, because every time, and I restart my computer a zillion times, unless there's a change, that it could automatically, it will automatically retain. Now, sometimes on earlier Mac OS versions, and I ran into this and had a kind of a long discussion with people that set up the Cubase labs at Berklee College of Music in Boston. And I think, and this may be from like the era of Mac that you have, that if an HDMI cable is connected, which is often going to be for a display monitor, that the Mac OS may want to automatically route the audio. Once it sees audio out of once it sees an HDMI connection, that it tries to automatically send the audio out of the HDMI. And a lot of labs of that era, they would just have to manually assign the audio interface because the Mac OS was trying to send the audio. It says, oh, they have a HDMI, so we must send all audio out of the Mac OS. So out of curiosity, I don't know if it's a desktop or a laptop, but if you do have something that's connected via HDMI, if you disconnect that and see if the behavior changes, that'd be interesting to see. But that is a Mac OS thing that was resolved in later Mac OS updates, and I realize that you may be kind of stuck and can't update your Mac OS on an older machine. You may be at the kind of last version that could run on your particular machine, but there was a Mac OS issue that would always try to, so, in the lab, they would have 48 students, and this is with every DAW, and then, once they had the HDMI cable connected to the display, every time that they would go to an audio program, they would have to define the audio driver because Mac OS would try to basically hijack the audio to send it out of the HDMI port. So you may be running into that. So that's something maybe you could research, but I think it's going to be a Mac OS issue. All right, so we see Roland Stuff says, hi, Greg. Sorry I can't join you this evening, but look forward to watching to catch up. In the meantime, sending greetings from everyone from Rockinghamshire in England. All right, so we see Vince says he went through all his online pages and re-edited the songs, kept them up to date. So that's great. Okay. So Sound Foundry Studios, it says it's a Fab Friday for a Cubase live stream. All right, so we see Ted Springman says, forgive me for not knowing the preset state of the art regarding chord recognition. Can Cubase 14 interpret chords from an imported audio track from which to render MIDI notes? Yeah, so I'll show you how we can do this. This was added a couple versions ago. Okay, so let's say we have our. So say I want to take, I have a chord track here. So I'm going to take this guitar part and drag the guitar to the chord track. And now it is kind of automatically figure out the chords. So just kind of drag a MIDI or an audio part from its track to the chord track. You could also select the track if you want to go to project, to chord track, and say create chord events. That would do the same thing, but just kind of drag the audio or MIDI to the chord track, and then the chords will automatically be analyzed and populated into the chord track. Great to see you on, Ted. Hope you're well. Stevie Ray or Ria says, hey guys, I just got the Cubase app for Android and iOS. It's an awesome bit of kit. I don't know how I survived without it. Greetings from Belfast in Northern Ireland. Thanks for joining us. Glad you're liking that. All right, and we see Lawrence from Rhode Island, Barn Door Recording. All right, so Greedo Kenobi just says, greetings, Greg and chat. Thanks for being on. All right, wonderful to see Mark Rabin checking in from Montana. Everyone give a big woof to Mark Rabin's dog, Stella. All right, so Rogerio just asked, hello guys, greetings from Brazil. Is there a way to copy an event volume curve from a clip event to another? So I don't think so. I know that if you actually, I think we may have covered this last time as well, but if we have, let's say, an event volume curve here, so it's considered kind of part of that particular event, because if we copy, you may just, could be different lengths, and then it may not kind of work. So let's say I have this event volume, so if we duplicate this particular track here, so if I come over here, let's duplicate, we can see that volume curve is automatically kind of incorporated, but there isn't a way, because it's kind of considered just part of the particular event. If we have our events duplicated, if we hit like Control or Command plus the letter K, we can say let's duplicate this 3 times, and before duplicating, if I convert this to a part, so we say events to part, and then I repeat this, so Control or Command plus the letter K. Now I could go into like the part editor, and now at this point, if I draw in like different event volumes, let's just grab my pencil tool and we draw in and add nodes, we can see that if when we do this, sorry, I'll make these, when we do we have the option when we do this to make it a shared copy. So when we have particular events here, so now I can, if I make a change on this one, we can see that particular change will be kind of carried over into all of the shared copies, but there isn't a way that I know of to copy the event volume, and the thinking is that it's going to be for that particular event when you copy the event, and if it's a different length, how it would reinterpret that. So those types of things can, there's a lot of other unintended consequences that could happen. All right, so we have Jefferson Allen Massive says, can I use my 9.5 Cubase Pro with my 14 Pro? I don't know how, but on 14 I can't get my tracks up or can't find any of my effects. So, it could be, so if you have a license for Cubase 9.5 Pro, you could have multiple versions of Cubase. I have one PC in my house that has I think Cubase 3 through Cubase 14 on it, every version, because sometimes people say, oh, can you open this? I had this working in 7.5, but it stopped working in 8 or, 10.5, whatever. So, but you could have multiple versions. So in regards to the plugins or tracks not showing up, if you want to, make sure that the plugins are, because there could be VST2 plugins that maybe you don't have the VST3 version of. And also, if you're on Mac, there's, VST2 plugins won't show up if they are, if you're running an Apple Silicon, because Apple Silicon doesn't support VST2 plugins. So if you give us a little more information, we might be able to help you out some more. Okay, my chat field jumped. Let me. And we see Jazzy just make a comment. It says, I doubt a Cubase 12 to 14 license works on old Cubase versions. So so under the news, if you have Cubase 14, that would give you licenses for Cubase 13 and 12. But if you have older versions like 11 and earlier, you'd still need to have your USB-E licenser connected if you're running Cubase Pro or Artist. Okay. All right. So we see Brian Sawyer joining from Yuma, Arizona. Thanks for joining us today. All right. Daniel Cabezas says, is the event volume curves with automatic audio segment detection only in the Pro version? Let's take a look. I'll boot it up in Cubase Artist and we will see. Might be, but I'll just reboot my Cubase up and there. Sorry for hitting my mic. All right, so let me try Cubase Artist 14. Okay, so let me just. Yeah, this probably be better. File. All right, so let me just. Go to the preferences here and check my tool modifiers. Yeah, it looks like it may be a Pro only feature because we would kind of see it here. So yeah, it looks like it's only in Pro, and we'll show that to people in Cubase Pro here. All right, and for those who aren't familiar with this feature, what it's going to allow you to do is like on a particular audio track. So I think it's going to be Innuendo and Cubase Pro. But now what we could do is just kind of hover over, and we could see that when we go into your settings, we'll go to our range tool and the tool modifiers that you have the audio segment editing. So that's not in artist, and I'm assuming it's not. So just holding down Control Shift, we can now just come over here and say, oh, I just want to take, just that little segment here and adjust the gain of it. So yeah, it looks like a Cubase Pro Innuendo feature only. Okay, so we see from says maybe feature request or feature request. When I'm arranging, this is from Val Y42. When I'm arranging more smaller clips, I always come into the new clip gain. I know it's complaining on a high level, but that bothers me personally so much. Yeah, and sometimes, so if we have, let's say, a bunch of smaller segments here, like we have in this track version, and I'm, moving stuff around. So, when we come over here, we had lots of people that could never find it. So, people are migrating for other programs and wouldn't go to kind of the top center. So, if you're kind of grabbing in the lower left-hand corner, unless you're resizing, maybe try to kind of grab the center area, or just kind of in the center, like when moving events, and see if, like if you have a habit of like grabbing from that particular area. But, usually when we're kind of moving events, if you click on it anywhere, it will automatically, you can still move. So you have to kind of almost aim for it. But if that's where kind of your muscle memory is taking you, I understand. But, a lot of times when people get kind of mixed up, if you just kind of, go over to the edge here, you could adjust that. And then you could always, just, hold down if you're kind of in the, you kind of go to the top area and just hold down Command or Control plus Shift. You could make your gain adjustments there. So I haven't run into that. I think the only time you'd maybe run into it is if you're sizing the left bottom handle. So let me know if that's where you run into it and you're accidentally doing it. But even with a bunch of small sections here, I could resize and move pretty easily. So let me know if that's, I'll pass it along as a feature request, maybe where you could hide it. Let me know if that would work for you, Val. All right. So Mark Rabin asks, Greg, I want to start working with voice to trigger recordings. Can you light me to the software Stevie Wonder uses with Cubase for visual impaired, or any voice activated DAW controller? So I'm not sure if he's actually triggering the events with his voice. Usually, and I think it's, it could be a system that, I could check with my friend Rob Arbitier. I know he's kind of set up this system for him. So I'm not sure if he's driving it from his voice, or if he's, most people, when, most visually impaired or blind users, as they're working, they may have, there's, I think on Mac OS, you could have the system sounds be read to you. A lot of them will use a Windows application called JAWS. That's a screen reader. So as they kind of hover over something, it could read the particular parameter for them. But I don't think it's actually being voice driven to like execute a command. Every time I've seen Stevie work, it's always like, he'll have a screen reader, so that when he comes over here, he'll say audio 05, audio 04, solo, edit, channel settings, and would just, on event labeled, very audio, vocal 1A421, you know, so it just kind of reads it out, but they don't actually drive it from voice commands. So all right, so we see Mark Rabin and his dog Stella is loving the cooler weather. We have Tiago joining from Brazil. All right, we see Coast Mastering, Michael Romanowski. Thanks, great to see you on, Michael. Hope you're well. I think I'll be out, Michael, in San Francisco for the Music Expo with Loic, so hopefully we could catch up when I'm out for that. All right, so we see Ted Springman just says, curious if Steinberg developers perused a forum and Jan's database for upgrade suggestions. So I know one of the, you know, main product marketing managers of Steinberg, you know, he often jokes is like, oh, I could get all my information from, you know, Cubase Index. You know, it's like, I'm like, oh, do you want me to send it to you? He's like, why? It's on Cubase Index. So you know, you'll see a lot of developers kind of responding to people on the official Steinberg forums. And, you know, but yeah, they are, you know, they do, you know, follow what we do here on the live streams and kind of use it as a marketing resource and to see what people's reactions to different things are. So we see from Watch Addicts is my 2015, this is 0.5, IMAX fast approaching boat anchor status. Yeah, so I know they're expensive machines, so. All right. All right, Jefferson Allen Massive says, I'm actually new to this. I probably need classes. So, yeah, ask any question. You know, there's, I think, wonderful resources on YouTube to learn Cubase. You can check out like One Man in a Song, I think is a great, he's a wonderful teacher, does incredible content. You can check that out on learning Cubase or learning HALion. If you're looking for a kind of a structured thing, but you know, and what we do here is just like when you have kind of a question, we could, and it could be like, you know, incredibly intricate, complex question or simple basic question. And what's a basic question for someone is incredibly intricate for another person, and you know, an intricate question is basic for another person. But I think regardless of what level you're at, you could always learn stuff, but just feel free to ask any question here on the live stream. And welcome to Steinberg community. All right, so Quellen just says, hello Greg, can you show the different ways to make a slide on bass and every other instrument by using the key editor or the stick, maybe stock plugin functions of Cubase, Retrolog, and HALion? All right, so a lot of times when I do bass stuff, I just kind of do it in the sampler track. Is really amenable to this, and you could always do it in like the actual instruments themselves can support it. So let's come over here to sampler track. Let's see if get my controller connected by USB here real quick. Sorry about that. All right, so let's say I have kind of a typical 808 bass sound, so we come over here. All right, so when we come over So we will say, okay, we will come over to, let's say, okay, so, we have this set here. So at this point, there is a glide function. So if I play one note and then I have it in legato, or I hold that note until the next note starts, we can just automatically do that. So usually the default settings will be and then you can say if you wanted to have a long glide, we could just kind of come over here. But we could also put this into monophonic mode so that we're only going to play one voice at a time, which is good for bass. So let's say we want to make that a shorter glide time-wise. And you can see that when I hit another note that the sample is re-triggered. But we could also put that into legato mode, so I could come over here and the sample will continue to play when I play a higher pitch. If we want to make that kind of faster, and I'll so you could do glides like that very easily. If you wanted to kind of do the same thing like in Retrolog, is well set up for this as well. So let's put this on like a multi-oscillator. Set number of voices here. And we could kind of detune here a little bit. So I think that there's a whole glide function here. So a lot of times it's going to be just done within the particular instrument is often kind of the best area to do glides. Some people will do portamento as a MIDI controller. Not a lot of instruments will support that, but actually kind of play around with the sampler track or like Retrolog are great instruments for doing glides, especially kind of for R&B music. Okay, you see Woo Production sending greets from Belgium. Okay. See Coast Mastering just says, awesome, see you at the expo, come by the studio if you have time. So yeah, I may have a little bit of extra time when I'm in San Francisco because I may be doing something at San Francisco Conservatory a day or two before, but I'd love to come by and see your new room, Michael. All right, so we see a question from Terry Gray. Hey, Greg, is there a way to make fades that I draw at the front and ends of clips respect snap settings? Let's give it a shot. So let's see, I don't have snap on, so let me turn this on. All right, let me see if I set this to beat. I guess there might be a way of, if you're doing kind of like a two-step process. So let's say if we move our cursor, and then I think if we have our song position, I think that we could just do I think we could do like a fade into cursor. So if we are just so if we're utilizing the cursor, we could just kind of come right over here and again fade in or fade out to cursor. So we could have that kind of a two-step process, but it doesn't seem like it's snapping to something like there. Like it seems like once we have a fade here, like not sure it's yeah, so maybe if you just come over and let's say if you use the snap to place the cursor and assign like fades to cursor. I'll play around with it though, see if there's some other, let's see if maybe I hold down a modifier. It kind of seems like it's snapping, but not necessarily to. Let me put this into grid mode here. Yeah, it doesn't seem like seems like it's snapping, but not necessarily to the. Like if you go forward and then back. So here I have it set to grid. So let me just try it on a completely different piece of audio here. So there it looks like the fades are now snapping to the cursor. So if this, try to make sure that's set to grid and snap is turned on. But then like as we move, we could see the snap point here. So we have it set to beat. So as I move over, it could just automatically snap to the beat there. I'm not sure why it wasn't doing it initially, but it could have been that I had the grid set to cursor here instead. But it seems like that once we made that change, that everything seems to be snapping as expected. All right, we see Mark Rabin says I'm running around in and out today. Got my mobile and currently in studio. I see today is not static, so I'm going to be on and off. So we see Tim K giving a big woof woof to Stella. All right, we see Gareth on from Bilbao, Spain. Always great to see you. All right, so we see Fly V just says, I keep having this problem with my mapping on frequency, and the mapping assistant always shows up as missing. So are you mapping the parameters? So sometimes when you do, mapping, it could be, so let's say let's just do a new project here. All right, so we have our frequency EQ. All right, I'll duplicate this track, and here we have a frequency EQ2. So it could be how it's assigned. So let's say I want to get to my MIDI remote, and we go to, let's say, my nano control here. Okay, so I want, let me just make sure I'm in the right mapping page here. All right, so I want this knob to control this parameter. All right, so let's say I'm in this plugin, this version of frequency. Okay, so I want this knob to control, let's say, we'll do band 2. So I want to map this knob to the gain. So I'm going to right click and we say MIDI remote mapping for EQ2 gain. Okay, so I come over here, I apply that mapping, and now we could adjust the gain. But I think if we go to this particular track, we open up this instance, it's not going to necessarily adapt and control this one because we programmed the particular, this instance of frequency to respond to that knob. So if you're doing it, you know, if you're assigning the frequency plugin, you know, on a particular track where you right click and assign the plugin, that way it's automatically going to control only that plugin parameter on that particular track. If we select a different track, so same parameter here, it doesn't control it because it's actually controlling this. But if we did it as like instead of controlling directly, if we assign this to a focus quick control, so when we do a focus quick control, that's going to basically be a, so I'll assign focus quick control 2 here. So now when we have a quick controls aren't channel specific. So as soon as I come over here, this is the active window. When it's a focus quick control, it's controlling this one. When I go to this one, it's automatically controlling that one. So focus quick controls are kind of track agnostic, if you will. It doesn't care what track it's on. It's really for that particular plugin. So if you assign by kind of right clicking and then assigned it to the MIDI remote, that way it's only going to control that particular plugin parameter that's on that track. So sometimes you may want to, on a group track, always have a parameter that adjusts the compressor threshold. And you want that to be fixed all the time because you're always using like compressor on a vocal group or drum group, something like that. Then you could always have that particular knob go to a group track and adjust that one parameter without having to open the particular plugins. Where if it's a focus quick control, the focus quick control is kind of doesn't, you know, whatever is the active window it's controlling versus what is the defined parameter on a particular track. So let me know if that makes sense or if that's helpful for you, Vince. Okay. See, Tim K just mentioning old computers are fun. He still has an old Lenovo X200 alive and kicking, maxed out in RAM, went full SSD, but I'm not trying to run Cubase on it. All right, reading through comments. All right, Steve Green asks, Greg, I have an audio event tempo detected. I imported a drum track from his Spectral Layers Unmix and cannot get the drum audio track to match the tempo detected audio guitar track. What's going wrong here? Okay. Okay. So let's say we just go to an unmixed track. All right, so let's say we have an unmixed track here. All right, so I'm going to take my drum track and drag it over. All right, let me just select it from the beginning here. All right, so let's take this drum track, drag it. Okay, so when we have like a drum track here, we just I'll just revert this quickly. Just show something here. Okay, so I'm going to take this particular drum track and drag it. Now, when we're kind of working in spectral layers and we're dealing with our different layers, these necessarily haven't been kind of broken down into, you know, so when we do this, we can see that we have that layers now on its own track, and we play this and the drums are muted. So what you may have to do is just to come over and say, let's render this particular file. So I'm just going to go to my audio menu and let's do a bounce selection. All right, now this is its own file. So if I want to do, let's say, let's do a quick tempo detection on this because this is going to be fluctuating. So I'll go to my project menu, to tempo track, to tempo detection. All right, so we have our analysis of this. All right, so I'm going to switch my meter here to 4/4 quickly. Okay, and now at this point, I'm going to go to my audio menu. So this is now a separate audio file. So it's not kind of playing part of spectral layers unmixed. It's its own separate file. And I'm going to embed go to my audio advanced, and we're going to say, let's set definition from tempo. So I'm going to write the definition into the audio file. And what that's going to do is basically take this particular audio file here, all these tempo changes that we see, and embed that into our file. So if I do a new project, we'll make an empty project here. And I'm going to drag this particular audio file . Okay, so, and I'm going to put this into musical mode. So now I could have it follow any tempo that I want. So I want it to be 160. be 200 beats a minute. I want it to be 140. So probably what you have to do, and if I want to add a tempo track here, and we want to kind of speed up and slow down, let's say we just want to do like a retard here. So now as we listen to it, so now it's following the tempo. So probably what you have to do when you unmix it is, if you've done the tempo detection after unmixing the drums, is to select the particular file and make sure to come over to the particular file and go to audio. So you want to first, do a quick bounce selection so that it's not playing a part of the unmixed file, but that particular file is automatically a new separate distinct audio file. And then when you go to your audio menu, if you haven't done that, go to your advanced to set definition from tempo, and then when you import it into a different project, it will automatically just carry over, and you can warp it to fit whatever tempos that you want. So let me know if that's helpful for you, Steve. All right, so we see Roberto says in Cubase Pro you can activate, deactivate all modulators on all tracks. Let's give it a shot. See if we can do it in the Project Logical Editor maybe. I haven't tried, so okay, so we have modulators here and there. Just see if there's. Let me just see if there's a key command for it real quick. So we'll try that first. If not, we'll see if we can do it via Logical Editor, Project Logical Editor. Okay, so it looks like we could bypass modulators in the mixer. So let's see if I come over here and okay, so I assigned a keyboard shortcut to that. So let's see if we come over here. Okay, so we can see our two modulators going on with the EQ and that. So let's see if we Yep, so you could just come over here. So that bypassed all of the modulators. So let's see if you need to be in the mix console for that to work. Yeah, so you might have to be in the mixer, and then you could have that key command to bypass the modulators. So we can see we're here, and now we could bypass the modulators. Let me know if that's helpful for you. Okay, we see Alexander saying hello to everyone. Great to see you on. Sorry, when Chatfield jumped. Okay, so we see from Elmizakady says, hello everyone, I'm James, a big fan of Cubase since Cubase 5. I'm teaching in my channel music composition and mixing using Cubase 14, my content for the Arabic world. Thanks for joining us today. We hope to see you on many more live streams. You see that Gareth is calling Mark Ravensdog Stella pacifist since he's never killed anything, just wants to mouth hug bunnies. All right, She Got Sun Knockers asks, is there a way to make the interface darker than the limited saturation strip? The darkest I could get is kind of a dark gray, but I want black. Okay, so let's see if we come over here. Let's get to our preferences. We'll see how dark we can get it. And we'll go to user interface. So say we'll go into, let's say, our project area background. So if I make this even kind of more dark, let's see if that's like dark. So when I hit apply, we'll see if, so we can see that that's pretty dark. Let me know if you've done that, and we could kind of do that for different areas of the program. So if you wanted to come over here, so for editor area backgrounds, so if we just kind of come over to like the project window, I'll just go to the default state. We can see that's kind of much lighter. If I go all the way to the bottom corner, we can see that kind of changed. And so you do have some control over kind of different aspects of the user interface here. So if you wanted to go to defaults, so let me know if you've tried that already. But I think that's maybe as dark as you could get it. And sometimes it's good for having a contrast with other areas of the program that are dark as well. All right, Ted Springman says, is there a facility in Apache or Cubase to more humanize the metronomic feel of the MIDI arpeggios? Yeah, let's take a look. So one of the great things with MIDI effect plugins is they are kind of stackable. So let's say I want to go here. All right, so I want to go over to our MIDI inserts. So let's say we put an Apache on. We'll make it All right, so we have our Apache on. All right, and so let's now come over here and put a quantizer plugin on and swing. I'll say I'll just do this where I can eighth note swing. Or let's see if we put that on first. So we'll do kind of quantizer. Let's see if that makes a difference if we do it. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's. Let me just check my. Let me try like a 16th note swing. Now we're doing 16th notes. And I'll just record this and we'll take a look at it on a grid, just to make sure. So let's look at it. Yeah, it looks pretty straight. All right, let me see if we do the. Let's try just another one of the. Let's try the Apache SX. But here you could kind of take yeah, let's say if I take this sequence here that we recorded already. So it may not do it in real time, but let me just grab this and I'll put the quantizer plugin on this. Yeah, I thought that would change it. Let me just, if we come over again, if we have the quantize, we could, just come over here. So let's put like an 80% swing on it. So if I quantize that now, we'll. Let me choose 8th, 16th notes instead with the swing factor. So now we quantize. So you could always quantize it after the fact, but I would think that we might be able to kind of stack these together. I'll just try it one more time, and maybe it's just the order. Okay, so let's say so I know if we put like a MIDI echo, that we could stack these. So I just hit one note that generally we could stack. So I thought that we could stack the quantizer on top of that. It doesn't seem like. But you could quantize it after the fact if you wanted to. And I'll play around with that, but I thought that that would work. But let me just. Yeah, but it doesn't seem to be kind of working as expected in real time. But you could always apply swing after. If you have a particular swing feel, so let's say if we come back over here where we had this pattern here with this swing, so let's say let's see if I'm on the right track. All right, so let's say I do kind of just the recording again. Now it's doing it. So let me just see what, maybe it had to be in record. Yeah, so maybe you have to be in record. Yeah, so if you're in record, then it seems to work. So yeah, so try just placing it record and do the quantizer plugin after the arpeggio. So sorry about that. All right. All right, we see Gerald Ely has dropped in to hit the like button, and he's on hold with AT&T. Good luck. All right. All right, so we see from Yassian, my Cubase 14 crashed when I tried to record my vocal project. I'm running the next VST plugins, SynthV, Melodyne, Wavelab, and Spectral Layers. Also, OmniVocal Beta, Spectral Layers 12. So let me know if you're recording a real vocal or if you're just using like Synthesizer, SynthV. Let me know if you're running SynthV, VST plugins, Melodyne, Wavelab, and Spectral Layers, and OmniVocal Beta, like all at once. You know, let me know if you're trying to generate a vocal harmony or you're trying to like generate a vocal through an AI tool, or if you're recording a vocal, because if you're recording a vocal, you probably don't need those other tools. Yeah, and if you get a chance to send that link, I think I emailed you, that'd be helpful as well. Okay, so we see Yazian just says, I'm running Windows 10, 11, Mac. So yeah, let me know like if you're recording a real vocal or if it's an AI vocal that you're trying to generate with. All right, so we see Balsa sending greetings from Montenegro. Thanks for joining us. Okay, reading through comments. Okay, so we see from FlyV says, yeah, thanks, Greg. Now I understand that and it makes sense. Would it be smart to keep a connected insert frequency and stereo out on my studio template and then drag that one to new location on different tracks? I don't think that there's any benefits of dragging it from one location to another location, because I still think that if you mapped directly to that particular track, it says that it sees the mapping as, insert to this parameter of this plugin, and if you copy it to another track, that mapping won't necessarily correlate over. But if you have, multiple, but if you're using like a focus quick control, then you should be, wherever the plugin appears, then it should be controlled as you kind of have it programmed. All right. Let's see. John Lunan says, just purchased it, going from Pro 10. Looking forward to trying out all the new features. Welcome to Cubase 14. And any questions that you have, just let us know. Okay. Also has a question. It says, is it possible to change spectral layers as ARA in Cubase navigation to be the same as Cubase's? They have different mouse click and scroll, shift control combinations, zooming and moving around. So I don't think that there's, I think that they're both kind of fixed, but there may be some, I know that developers are aware of it to make it kind of more consistent overall. But I think that, when you're running an ARA, that, the program's functions don't change because of the host application. So currently I don't think that there's a way to do that. So we see question, any chance to emulate LA2A style compressor in Cubase stock? It'd be great to have it in the future. So I think if you go, check, between the vintage compressor and the, let's come over to the tube compressor, that I think you can kind of get very similar results. I think that if you just kind of use those two plugins. So experiment with those if you haven't. All right, so we have Sound Loop Records sending greetings from Finland. All right, see Uno Momento talking with Sound Loop Records here in Finnish. All right, we see Michael Marshall joining from Somerset, UK. Wonderful to see you on, Michael. Hope you're well. We see Benny from Sweden, who's out on a gig again. So Benny has lots of gigs. That's good. All right, Sound Loop Records says, can anyone advise when I import an audio file into Cubase, how do I sync the click to it? All right, so let's just do a new project here. All right, so I'm going to import an audio file. Okay, so let's say sorry, just All right, so when we listen to this, we can see that the click isn't aligned with the audio file. So what you could do is just come over here, go to Project, Tempo Track, Tempo Detection. And now we could have our tempo detection. And it'll do it by beats. So come over here, let's say, okay, I want it to be in 4/4. And we've created the tempo map from the audio file or from a MIDI performance. So again, to do that again, we'll just Project, Tempo Track, guess we have to. So, and just go to the tempo detection. So if I want to do a different file here, I'll import a different file again to show you. And now we have the tempo detection. And then if you have like a pickup note, sometimes you may come over here. So let's say, okay, we're gonna come here. Let's make that a 4/4. So, and then we have that tempo map. So all of our MIDI, if I wanted to add drum loops on top of that, it would all So that's, again, so select a file, project, tempo track, tempo detection, and it will figure out the tempo for you. All right, so we see from Steve Green, just says, thanks, Greg, amazing, somehow worked. Now, is there a way of taking the bounce drum audio and converting it to MIDI Groove Agent 5 in order for me to choose drum sounds? All right, let me go back to Rude Judy song here. Okay, so let me just revert this. Okay, so we see, I come over here, let's say we want to do kind of drum replacement. Just turn that down to kill, sorry. So I'm going to drag my drums over, or select the drums. And let's within spectral layers, I'm going to take the drum part here. We'll go to our modules and we'll say unmixed drums. So now we just have that drum layer selected, and now we could unmix, like, you know, kick, snare, hat, and I think cymbals. Give it a second here. And then if we want to do kind of sample replacement, we could do that. Show that. And it's about 33% done. About 50% done. Right, it's about 70% done. And just about 80%. Okay, just about done. All right, so now I can see that we have kick, snare, toms. All right, so I'm going to take like my kick and snare layers here and drag those over. Put them on different tracks. Okay, so we have. All right. All right, so what I want to do now is just take the kick, and I'm going to go into, let's add a groove agent track. Okay, I'm going to load up a groove agent kit, or you could just drag and drop your own samples. Okay, so I'm going to come to the kick, come right over here. Let's go to our hit points, and we will say, okay, we're going to find kind of our hit points, and then we'll make MIDI notes. So I have my groove agent track selected, so I'm going to say MIDI notes. Let's put on C1. And then so now we're going to listen to it. We'll mute the kick. So all the kicks you're hearing. So let's do the same for the snare. So we will come over here. Again, double click. Let's go to our threshold. Make MIDI notes, and we're going to put this onto D1. Or whatever MIDI note. Okay, so I'm going to mute the original kick and snare, and now we'll kind of play along with the groove agent drums. All right, let me just get my snare set up here. All right, I'm just gonna adjust my threshold here on a snare. All right, so we have all right, so let's set threshold here for snare. Okay, and now let's make MIDI notes to D1 again. Okay, so now we'll play back with the original track. Now you can take like a 35-year-old recording, about 35 years, maybe 33 years old, and replace the kick and snare, and retain all the dynamics. So once you have the drums that are unmixed, come over here and drag the select the drum layer, and then you want to unmix drums. Take those into the timeline, go into your hit points, and at that point we will choose to make MIDI notes, and then we'll replace the MIDI notes and have those routed directly out to Groove Agent here. So if we wanted to combine the original kick, at that point you just kind of replace the drums on a multi-track and replace them with samples in Groove Agent. So let me know if that's helpful for you. All right, so we see from Sound Loop Records, and how can I get the beat count BPM visible from an imported audio file? Okay, so let's say if I want to take the original recording, so we'll go back to our example that we're working on previously. All right, so let's say we'll take this and we want to see the BPM visible. So now we've done our tempo detection. You could, if you want to come over and go to more options, you'll see a time display. You could right click here and see bars and beats. I realize there's a 5/4 measure. So, and sometimes depending on, if you have multiple time signature changes, you can put those in with the signature track. But if you want to see the it visible, just again go to your studio menu. It's on the grid. You can see it on the transport here, but if you want to see it large, go to your studio, to more options, and then choose the time display and right click, and you can switch it to different time formats. All right. All right, so we see Supra says, "Yo, Greg, which Cubase feature is your favorite these days?" It's like picking a favorite child. So I don't, I have kind of a different Cubase use than almost anyone else. Like I'm probably one of the few people whose job is to not run Cubase for my own personal interests. I always try to think of how Cubase works for you, how it works for the end user, not how I'm doing it. And hopefully I can help people figure out workflows. But it's kind of like I don't have any skin in the game with a particular favorite feature. If someone thinks that a feature is great, then I'm like, I really like that feature. And then 10 minutes later, if someone's like, oh, that's the coolest thing I ever saw, then I like that feature because I helped someone. So, but maybe other people could share their favorite features. I think like maybe the chord detection I think is great. The tempo detection like we're doing here. Like I was happy to replace drums that I recorded like 33 years ago with more contemporary stuff, in a really budget $15 an hour studio, so that was kind of fun to hear the drums kind of come through on that Rude Judy song. But maybe other people could chime in what their favorite features are. It's always great for me to see. All right, so Yazian just saying real vocal and AI. So, yeah, so, let me know if you're running, what all functions that you're running. So if you have like 6 things going on, your real vocal, that, may not be the best, may not be the best use of, just because you have a lot of tools. All right, so Ted Springman just says stackable MIDI plugins is today's epiphany for me. Thanks, Greg. So yeah, you're welcome. Play around with it. You'll kind of have endless, creative, fun, great stuff that gets generated just completely accidentally. It's great. Sound Loop Records says, does anyone know when Cubase 15 will be released? So when it's done and ready. So, and Ben Tyerman just says, I'm only just getting used to 14. So, keeps me employed when they do new versions. More people on live streams learning new stuff. So. All right, Q Harris Music says I used Cubase 10 Pro, but now I'm using the Pro 14 and I'm in love with the 14 Pro. It has all the tools. That's great. Ben Tyerman says he went from version 8 to 13, then 14. It's a massive upgrade. You see D Harris Music says went from 5 to 14. Yeah, it's 20 years basically. All right, John Lunan just says, hi, can you show any updates on the plugins we could use for saturation? All right, so let me just maybe just do a quick drum thing, and we could saturate drums in a couple different ways. Start with something clean. Alright, so say we'll kind of maybe do this, and we'll do a little saturation on this. Alright, so one of the great hidden saturation gems is always going to be quadrifuzz. So let's go over here on distortion. So you can do like bit crusher. So if you want to kind of just, the amount of, so this way we could have, so that bit crusher is always handy if you're doing like some EDM stuff as well. Always kind of destroyers, like really good for like a particular like kind of kick drum distortion. So if you want to, so another kind of wonderful EDM type tool if you want more kind of like a rock thing. Maybe come over to so let's do quadrifuzz 2. So this is a multi-band distortion where you could have 5 different types of distortion, and actually and then you could have delays on each of the bands if you wanted to. So if you wanted to come over here, I want tape saturation tube, I want to have just distortion, a decimator for kind of mid to low frequencies, and let's run it through a delay chain and have that be kind of, and this is all kind of multi-band that you could split different frequencies. So there's lots of great stuff to play with in here. And always one of my, like, an early Steinberg favorite, it's Grungelizer. So you could actually come over here, add like crackle, and you could choose whether it's 33, 45, or 78 RPM if you wanted to have noise. And you could have hum at 50 or 60 cycles, so Euro hum or North American hum. And kind of just an overall EQ. So just a couple of the great kind of distortion offerings available in Cubase, and there's others as well. So let me know if that's fun for people to check out. There you see D. Harris Music says 14 Pro is the best. All right. Okay, Uno Mementos telling people to not forget to hit the like button. All right, you see Pertti Komenen checking in from Finland as well. All right, you see Sound Loop Records just says thanks for showing. All right. All right, we have Pastoral Apologetics joining from Southeast Texas. Great to see you on. All right, so we see Sound Loop Records. It says I download new Cubase 14. I tried to download complete 11 Ultimate plugins, but Cubase won't accept them. So make sure that when you're doing it that you're installing the VST3 versions and that they're all complete. 11, I think, is, or were they up to 15 now? But make sure you add the VST3 and that they're all 64-bit. See, great comment from Supra. Says, yeah, Cubase stock is all you ever need. I'd say most DAWs have great stock plugins these days, with Cubase in particular. All right, so we see Steve Green just says, Greg, fantastic. See Jazz Dude referencing his son. Maybe like old Sun bass amps. That's my first bass amp I ever had, was a Sun Beta Bass. All right, Balsa says, can key/notes on the MIDI keyboard be used in MIDI remote to assign commands? So yes. So when you're going to do like your MIDI remote setup, but realize that, so when we come over here and we go to add a new MIDI remote, but it's any MIDI message that you are kind of dealing with can be used, but realize that if you set a particular key up for a function, that key won't be, like, that MIDI message will be kind of hijacked for other functions. So but yeah, you could definitely set it up as a quick, as a MIDI, anything that transmits MIDI information you could use for the MIDI remote control functions. So a lot of people may use just like a 25 key keyboard just to, and not use it to actually play anything, but just have it for MIDI remote functions. Okay, so we see from Yazian that he's recording AI vocals and one vocal with spectral layers in Cubase 14. So is there a reason that you're running spectral layers on your AI vocal? Because usually that's kind of the point of doing an AI vocal, so you don't have to do as much. So you see from FlyV says, I got my frequency mapped and staying on my stereo out now, but it's doing changes on its own, not letting me edit. So make sure, like, if you open up a MIDI track, and let's say if you have kind of, see if you're, like, I had, like, you guys have probably seen my Chord Nano control, and I accidentally spilled like a glass of water on it, like a big dummy. And I had, one of the faders was malfunctioning, and it would just send kind of different information constantly when I didn't touch the fader. So it was like the fader was constantly transmitting MIDI data. So make sure that your controller isn't misbehaving and sending out a bunch of information. And let me know like what controller it is, and if it's connected via like directly connecting to particular instruments, or like the particular plugin. So let's say if you go to the EQ plugin, the frequency. So when you come over here, if it's where you right click on a parameter and mapped it, or if it's being mapped from kind of quick controls here. And if you have different banks that are configured for mapping pages, make sure that the mapping page you're on is set up for the particular, that you have the same mapping page on the controller, that, the correct mapping page is selected here as well. Okay, we see Flyvee just had to restart Cubase. Now it's all holding together. So. All right, so we see John Lunan just says perfect. See Sound Loop Records says currently Cubase is the best sequencer program. I've added Cubase since version 5. Balsa just says relative to grid is my new favorite thing in Cubase. That's a great feature. I'll show it to people who maybe just aren't aware of it. So let's say if we have an event on a particular track, I could drag this event out and I put it on, let's say I move it, and I want this to always be slightly ahead of the beat, not to start like right on measure 2 here. So a lot of times when we have something set to snap, and we could turn snap on and off by hitting the letter J. So when we have things set on snap, that it will snap, you know, like right now we have it set to snap to bar, or I could snap to beat, but I wanted it to be, again, a little bit ahead. So when we change our snap mode from grid to grid relative, and let's say I have bar selected, when I go to move the event, it's still going to be like this amount ahead of the grid line. So now when I move, we can keep it relative to the grid, so that it's not going to be on a grid, but that same proportionality of how it is mapped, you know, or how it's snapping. So that will be preserved in grid relative. So those who haven't discovered that feature, that comes in handy, where you may not want, you know, as we make copies of something, we can come right over here and just kind of duplicate it and still maintain kind of the relative position to the grid instead of always being bound or tied to the grid. You know, Memento's just bragging now that he's been running Cubase since 1.1. Okay. All right, so we see Sound Loop Records as he switched from Atari to Cubase and life became easier. Okay, so we see Peter Morris says I upgraded from Cubase 7 Pro to Cubase Artist, which I like, but it was missing certain things I had in Cubase 7 Pro, so I upgraded to 14 Pro. All right, so we see Bratman Studios. Says Greg, you're working on a switcher box that did changes to press a button. How's it going? So yeah, I think I'm going to submit it to Steinberg. Final things. I think I have about 2,000 controls mapped on a Stream Deck. Just kind of going over with a fine-tooth comb, make sure I didn't misspell words, and make sure everything is legible. And then when I transferred it from Mac to PC, like all the fonts had changed as well. So I had to go back through every one and individually set the font size on Windows. So it's probably what I'll be doing Sunday night. But yeah, it's coming along. All right, so Yazian just asking, should I use it with or without extension, like import AI lyrics track? So I'm not sure which particular AI tool that you're referring to. So, all right. If it's an AI tool, but I don't think that I'm not sure, the ones on the market, if they import text files for the lyrics. All right, John Lunan says, hi Greg, I was wondering if you could recommend which plugin would be best in Cubase for cleaning up the master of my track. I'm aiming to make it sound more polished and clear. So, there's lots of plugins that could do that. If you really wanted to be like incredibly surgical about it, the frequency EQ can be this is probably, I would say it's an incredibly powerful tool now. And when you're working with it, some of the things that make it kind of unique. So let me I'll start this beat again here. So one is like when you're searching for frequencies, if you kind of turn this button on, you could come over, and as you make a change, you only hear like what you're actually changing. So if you're kind of looking for a particular, like the snare there, you can just simply, as you make adjustments, instead of hearing it kind of in context of the whole file, which may be harder to kind of isolate what you're looking for, here as we move, we're only hearing the particular frequency that we are adjusting. In the frequency realm, if you know what the song of your key is, you could also come over here, and instead of like, you see a lot of people always want to cut particular frequency levels, but the key of the song determines which frequency levels are kind of built up. But here we could say, okay, I want this to be, we're in a key of G, so I want it to be G5, and I could hit enter, and that will automatically set the EQ pitch, and we can see a piano keyboard here. So as we move, you could actually make your EQ adjustments. So you say, okay, I'm in the key of G. I could just come over here and I could move that particular EQ node right to G. As we kind of want to come over here, and let's say we have band 4, but I want to EQ kind of the middle part of the panning spectrum, like where vocals and snare drums are, differently than like the outside, like the left and right edges on the panning spectrum. So if we come over here, let's say the EQ4, this band, we could also say, okay, I want to do like a mid side, so I could EQ the middle part of the panning spectrum, and let's do the sides. So even if I wanted a different Q factor for the sides, I could come over here, and now we're just kind of hearing what's on the sides versus the middle part of the panning spectrum. And we could also do each, so we have mid-side, stereo, or left and right. So we have, I could EQ the right channel differently than the left channel using only one band. And also, if I want to come over here, let's say I want to turn on band 5. At this point, we could come over to, particular bands. Let's say I'll do band 6, and I wanted to do compression just on this, so we could do a dynamic EQ, so that we could just apply compression directly. So if you have frequencies that built up, and a lot of times what you're doing with particular, to make something sound more polished, is, it's not necessarily boosting, but it's taking things that are clashing away from each other. So, just being able to kind of do your dynamic EQ. If you want to do, let's say, okay, band 1, I wanted to switch my EQ type, and we can say, okay, right now it's peak, but if I wanted to do like a notch filter or 96 dB cut, so that I don't need to see, I don't want to hear anything below particular frequencies as we're playing, so a lot of flexibility here. So if we just want to, so if you're looking to kind of get rid of some mud, you could just, any kind of low end rumble, you could get rid of there. So a lot of polishing for your particular track could be done directly with the frequency EQ. So I would spend time with that, and I think that's a great use of time in getting polished sounding tracks done. All right. See, Gerald Ely says, I got back in time to see the grid relative. Tip, love it. Okay, Steve Green asks, hi Greg, I created MIDI notes from the unmixed drums. If I want to change the assigned MIDI note, how do I do this? I.e., let's say Tom's from A1 to D2. Okay, so if you have just like the MIDI notes themselves on a particular, so, you know, let's say if I drag like this pattern over, all right, so I have this. So there's a number of ways that we could do it. So if we have a drum editor, you know, you could just come over. Let's go to the drum editor here. And say, you know, I want these particular notes. You know, we could select all of the notes. And if you hold down the Control or Command key, I can move all these notes without moving them in time. So you could do that. Now, if you have notes here and you want to change the actual note in Groove Agent that it's triggering, like, okay, you want this snare to be on, you know, let's say F3 instead of D1. If you click right here in Groove Agent on this little drum, you can say Edit Hardware Controllers. And then once you do that, we could just say, you could right click and then we could choose our trigger MIDI notes. So we can say, okay, I want this to be on F3 instead. So now this note responds to F3. So you can change it within the editor itself, or if you click here on the drum remapping, then you could right click on a pad and set its MIDI input note. All right, so Mark Raven says, Greg, PHP is your friend for renaming. All right. Balsa asks, how to make mono track mic input split and go to 2 cues interface outputs, 1 cue with effects processes on the track for the vocalist, and 1 raw unprocessed for front of house. All right, so let's come over here. All right, there's a couple different approaches. So I'll remove these tracks. So we're going to have a mono audio track. Okay, so let's say I have 2 groups. Okay, so I'm going to add a group track. I'll make these stereo groups. Okay, so let's say one is, okay, so we see, so there's a couple different ways. So we say this is vocalist mix, and then we'll say front of house here. Okay, so the vocalist, when we're here, so let's say this is our vocal track. Okay, so as we're here, we're going to say, okay, we now want to send this track to the vocalist mix, and we'll say, okay, we want this to be 0 dB, and we want to send this to our front of house group. Okay, so now this track is going to both of those. And let's say on our vocalist mix track, we want to put an insert. Okay, so we could just say, so let's put a reverb on. Okay, so this way, now these groups could go to different destinations. So let's say we have let's create, like we have audio connections. So I want to make like 2 outputs. So we'll say monitor mix, and let's add, we'll make it another stereo out, and we'll call this front of house. Okay, so this group could be routed to the monitor mix, and this could be going to the front of house. So that's one way. So this vocal channel is getting sent to 2 different groups. So we select our vocal here. So it's going out to the vocalist mix, the vocalist, and to the front of house. The vocalist mix is going to the monitor mix, and the front of house is going to the front of house physical outputs. Now, another way that you can do this, if you're utilizing the control room, so let's say we have our vocalist mix, and in our control room, we go to our audio connections, and let's go to our control room, and we're going to set up like different headphone mixes. So let's say instead of reference, we're going to call this our vocal mix. Okay, so now this is going to, and within our management, within the output here, we would say our vocalist mix is going to be going to a different output, right? And this could be something that's feeding a headphone amp. All right, so once we have this, we're going to take our vocals, and our vocal is going directly to our main output. So we come over here, we can say this is, we'll say this is our main mix, and we go to Q sends. I could send this out, so we click on the Q sends tab here on the right hand side of the channel strip. So we can just come right over here. We see the Q send. So now we're going to send this out to the Q send. All right. So it's going out to the main outputs, and it's going out to the Q send. And when we go to our control room over here, what we want to do is to say, okay, we have our vocal mix. We'll see an insert tab here, and the vocals wants to hear reverb. So now the vocalist can have like a courtesy reverb, if you will. And now this is only going to the output that's feeding, let's say, the headphone monitoring system of the vocalist, and not going to the front of house. So probably the cleaner way to do it, if you've worked with the control room, is to take the vocal, send it out to the main mix, and then also send it to the Q mix, the Q send. And on the Q send, select the insert tab and add a reverb or delay there for, whatever plugin you need to make the vocalist more comfortable. That won't be recorded. It won't be sent to front of house. It's a separate monitoring path. This way may be cleaner. The first way may be kind of, if you haven't worked with the control room, is a way you could do that, but the control room is really well set up for that particular scenario that you described. So let me know if that's helpful for you. right, John Lunan says, thank you, great stuff. We see Sound Loop Records says, thank you very much for the live. Steve Green says, absolute genius. All right. So we have Tarek MG says, hi, how can I have my favorite VSTs and plugins in a specific folder in the media bay on the right? Is there a way to star them or something like that for quick access? Okay, so let's say we have kind of our favorite plugins, our go-to plugins, if we will. So let's just add a couple audio tracks here. All right, and I want to have just quick access to them as needed. So we'll come over to our studio menu, to VST Plugin Manager. And what we could do is we could create, if you want, so here we could create kind of an organized plugins how we want. We could make a new folder, but I could also just come over here and I'm going to duplicate this folder here. Okay, so I'm going to click on plus and we'll say copy current collection. All right, so I'm going to call this faves on top. Okay, now what I want to do is to create a folder, and I'll just say favorites. Okay, so, and I'm going to just say, let's just drag some plugins over. All right, sorry. All right, so, and we see my favorites folder here. So I can say, okay, I like Black Valve. I like that one. I like Cloner. I want Destroyer, Frequency. I want kind of the Pultec style EQ. So I could just kind of come over here. So now when I go to my media rack here, I could just say, okay, let's go to our VST effects. And here's my favorites right here in its own category. So that way you could just kind of drag and drop, but you could organize all of your plugins, whether it's instruments or audio effects. You could just simply organize them right here. So again, go to your studio menu, to VST Plugin Manager. You want to click on the plus sign to, you could make a brand new folder, a brand new collection, or just choose to copy the current collection, give it a name, click here to add a folder. You could give the folder a label and just drag and drop your plugins over, and now you can see your favorites plugins and say, oh, I really like Destroyer on that track, and you're done. So let me know if that's helpful. All right, so Soren says, I earned almost $2 1 month on Facebook user-generated content. My song was used 24,000 times in Facebook's Content ID. In April, the Facebook UGC stopped coming to me. Has it stopped for anyone else? Sorry to hear that. 24,000 streams for $2. Well. So we see Tarek MG says, fantastic, much appreciated. Would that also reflect in the mixer insert browser? I believe it will. Let's take a look just to make sure. So let's come over. So say mix console. I want to go to my inserts and we'll see like your favorites plugins right here. So that same plugin collection would be applicable whether you're using on the mixer, the media bay, or on the inspector as well. Smokin' Fools asks, my routing issue, I guess Cubase 11 Pro needs loopback to use it live for OBS. I use undo looper, Motu M4, Valhalla with loopback that goes to OBS. This is the way I do it. Is there a better way? So realize that, that's probably the best way is to use the loopback that's on your audio interface. So, most of them are pretty simple to use. Sometimes the routing can be a little complex, like with my Steinberg UR242C that I'm using. I could have Cubase talk to it from my DAW drivers. I could say, okay, and then if I needed to send it to OBS or to Zoom or Microsoft Teams, I could just simply come over here and set the streaming. So we could just set that same interface as a streaming, and I could have my voice connected, and I could have different DSP processing. So it's really kind of a function of the audio interface, and that and how that audio interface is kind of sets up the loopback. But most of them have kind of made it much easier by kind of offering multiple like audio drivers for the same audio interface, so that you could just simply define in OBS or Zoom or Teams which particular audio interface that you're using. Okay, we see Virtual Allen's from Scotland. Great to see you on. Says, hi Greg. Question. Is there any way to have an audio USB device, audio cassette gadget, or USB mic to integrate while having my ASIO Focusrite interface back and forth out of 13 tool? Okay, sorry. My ASIO Focusrite interface active, Cubase 14 Pro, Windows 11. You could try to run, maybe a lot of people might try to use kind of like a generic Windows driver for that. The tricky part is when you run into scenarios, because you have two different audio devices, and Cubase and every DAW, I assume, likes to have everything kind of go out, play, and record in time. So when we have two USB audio interfaces, if their clocks aren't synchronized, it could just simply tell it, there's no way for those two clocks, if they're just kind of freewheeling, it's like rolling two tires down a hill and getting it to be the same exact every single time. If you do it 100 times. So if you record in one device and the other device, the other tire is kind of ahead this time because it hit a rock and got a little bump and gained a little momentum or inertia, that when you go to play back, what was a little bit ahead is now out of time with what was recorded. So that's why there's kind of like a unified clock. And that's why generally you can't synchronize multiple kind of USB devices. So if you have the option, it's always going to be best to have one single device. Some people would use ASIO for all on a Windows platform. It is always going to be we'll call it a slightly disappointing experience when you actually kind of utilize it. And a lot of people say, oh, I could stack all my audio interfaces and they're all kind of slightly out of time, and the latency gets compounded. So there isn't really a great way to do it. So you could fake it by running kind of like an ASIO for all, but it's not going to be kind of satisfying results. So I would personally kind of switch back and forth between your USB interface and the Focusrite, or send a cassette into your Focusrite so that the clocks are the audio clock is unified. Okay. So Ben Tyerman just asked, would the LA2A compare to Steinberg's tube compressor? So yeah. All right, wonderful to see Sable Winters checking in from the Bay Area. Wishing everyone a happy Friday from San Francisco Bay Area. All right, we see Michael Teams on from Weatherford, Texas. I was just wondering where Michael was. So. All right, Michael Teams is granted Bratman Studio 1 gallon of Texas Best Strawberry Ice Cream. Glad to have you on, Michael. Michael Teams is sending Soren congratulations for hitting the $2 big on Facebook. Okay, reading through comments. All right, so let's get to some questions that were mailed in advance. All right, so we had a question last week on Tuesday. Let me just open up my project here. About does Cubase have any included spring reverbs? And I couldn't find any in my, I thought that there were some inside of the Reverence convolution reverb, and I couldn't find any, but there are some. So I think I had some of my Media Bay files weren't actually scanning all of my content. So now when we come over here and we go to Reverence and we go to Spring, we can see that there's a number of different spring reverbs that are available to access here. So if we want to listen to one, let me just open up a quick project and we'll listen to the spring reverb. So we'll switch it from the plate. If you're not familiar with spring reverb, is actually used to send audio through a bunch of springs that were in a device. So if anyone that dealt with like PA heads that had spring reverb or guitar amps, sometimes you would kick it and get a very annoying sound, and sometimes the spring reverb would automatically just kind of get kicked and make a really pretty dreadful sound. So, but let's take a quick listen to some of the spring reverb presets. Let's say we'll just take this guitar. And if you have like electric guitars, a lot of electric guitar amps had spring reverbs in them. So again, we'll just add an effects track. So some different. And sometimes when people are looking for spring reverb, they're looking for a bad reverb, and these are very well captured impulse responses of spring reverb. But yes, the reference will have a number of spring reverb impulse responses with it. Okay, and then we had a question, I think it might have been Michael Marshall, who had asked, does the HALion preset or Roland stuff, distortion guitar, VX, respond to MIDI velocities? All right. Okay, so let's come over to that. So I kind of loaded up a quick preset. Let me just... Okay, so I loaded up the preset here, so we'll just kind of play it so we can hear. So some instruments, will have, so I just kind of took a MIDI part here where we kind of do eighth notes and we start from a low velocity and kind of raise the velocity up and down. So let's take a listen to it and we'll hear how this particular song changes. And I'll slow the tempo down just a little bit. So it seems to kind of scale. It's not changing sounds per se, but it seems to kind of follow the velocity contour as expected for me. Okay. Next question. It says, screenshot attached along the expected instruments. I'm seeing the extra layer called Laguna in Spectral Layers 12. What is it? Can you also please forward a feature request for Spectral Layers to have some sort of progress bar? Those quality unmixes can take a while. All right, so if we have a particular file here, so let's just come over. So when we see this in Spectral Layers, I'm going to double click and we will launch kind of our Spectral Layers tab. And this is kind of what we see here is this area called, if you look at it, it just says Laguna. And what is this? So this allows you to kind of see all of the different layers kind of in a composite. And then if you wanted to have different color schemes, you could come over here and just kind of switch between different color schemes here. So this way you could, it's really just kind of a visual preference. So it's not an actual audio layer. This allows you to kind of see, instead of each of the layers having their own color, we could see the intensity of the particular frequencies. But when we come over here, now we could see that, the yellow are going to be the drums, the bass is this frequency, the vocals is going to be this color. So this would kind of unify it all to a single color, but different levels of brightness. And then the Laguna is just one of the particular colors that you would see here. When unmixing, so this is already unmixed. And the second question was, is there some sort of progress bar? Okay, so I'll just quickly put another song over here. Let's import a quick audio file. And now in Spectral Layers 12, you could see. So when we go to unmix, so now I'll come over here. Let's double click. And when we go to unmix, under the modules, it will say unmix song. We do this. So we'll apply. So as it's doing it, we'll get an estimate here, and just probably when it gets through its first percent. So 2 minutes and 34 seconds remaining. So now you do get kind of an estimate of how long like an unmixed process will take. So you have time to go to go to the restroom, make a cup of coffee, say hi to your kids, stuff like that. So, but there is, and that was, I believe, one of the new features in Spectralayers 12. All right, let me see if we have some more live questions. Okay, let me just go back quickly here. Okay, so we see a question from Mark Rabin. It says, I have an all General Electric in the US. We have 120 volts AC, usually about 117 in my studio. With conditioning, would it make audible difference to use DC offset? You could always open up a file in Wavelab and see, generally I think, and see if you need to do DC offset. So let's say if I take this particular file, I'm going to move it here. I'm going to remove the extension on this particular track. So let's say if you just come over and let's see if we look at the file here. So let's say as we kind of playing this, and let's see if we go, if it's shown in statistics. So here you could see what the DC offset is of the particular file. So if we see, let's say, so now if I take this file, we go to our audio, to processes, and remove DC offset, and we do an analysis of it now. We'll see if that, I'm not sure if that's a high level or not. So let's go back to our statistics. And we can see our DC offset is now 0.00%. So you could do it in Wavelab, or you could do it directly inside of Cubase, and it's wonderful mastering. Dear friend of mine, Greg Lukens, who's a wonderful mastering engineer. I've been in a room when he called Ed Cherney and told him that he should just that he had a DC offset problem on a Bonnie Raitt mix that he won a Grammy for. So that was kind of interesting to be in a room for that. And he's like, oh, I forgot to check. So it's one of those things, like, just make it part of your process to always check for DC offsets, because it could come back and bite you later. I don't have like super special high quality power, but it's a fairly, like a 6-year-old house, so it's not 50-year-old power in the house. All right, FlyV says, what's Project Sync setup, and what should I connect and used for? Should I connect one of my devices, and which one? So it used to be in the old days that, the sequencer was always locked to time code. So all of the audio tracks were on a tape machine, and the tape machine would have like SMPTE time code, and it's spelled SMPTE for Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. It's a professional organization for standards. So in SMPTE time code would send out a code as a reference, and this code was used for many different devices. If you were kind of had two tape machines that were synchronized, one was sending SMPTE timecode out to the other machine. If you were having the automation of your console synchronized to the tracks playing on tape, the console would be synchronized to that timecode. So in the old days, when we would, when the computer was just acting as a sequencer with MIDI information, how we integrated that before we could do all the amazing audio capabilities that Steinberg generated with VST was to have the time code. When you hit play in a tape, that time code would be sent into a converter box, and that converter box would convert the SMPTE time code often directly to MIDI time code, not necessarily always, but it would take that time code so that the computer could follow along with the machine, with the tape machine. So when you hit play in the tape machine, then the computer would see that it's like where to start playing in time, and would follow the computer and would follow the time code from the tape machine. Now also people, when utilizing, so if you're not doing a tape machine or a video deck, you don't have to worry about SMPTE timecode. If you have a drum machine that maybe you program beats on and made a pattern, there is another form of timecode called MIDI clock. And MIDI clock is kind of a much coarser, it's not as fine a resolution. When we deal with SMPTE timecode, we have frames. So generally, like if you're in Europe, you have 25 frames per second, and that matches how many frames of the film. So if you're playing from a movie from the film, there would be 25 frames per second. And then if in America, it was generally 30 frames a second. So there's kind of different frame rates, and you'd have to be synchronized with that frame rate. Now, some devices, if you have like an external sequencer on like a keyboard workstation, like a Chord M1, and you programmed all your sounds in the Chord M1 and you wanted to transfer it to the computer or a drum machine, you could connect that via MIDI clock. So if we go to your transport, so to get this to sync to external timecode, we would just say activate external sync, and then you have the project sync settings. So when you're doing like MIDI timecode, you'd say, okay, our source is going to be, we're going to have MIDI timecode, and MIDI timecode is coming in from this port. And if you have digital audio, you want to have the clock from the device in the sync box. If you are working with MIDI clock, where you want to sync a like another instrument's sequencer, what you could do is just simply come over here and have Cubase send MIDI clock out of the MIDI port that is being utilized to send sync. So sync isn't used as much now because everything, your video, all of the audio is generally in the program. But if you go to a recording studio and are like, okay, we're going to sync up your project, they're going to send you SMPTE timecode, and generally you have a sync box that's going to output MIDI information, and you connect that into your MIDI interface, and then it's also going to send audio clock information, and you'd send that audio clock into a clock input of your audio interface. And often you would see like a BNC word clock. You could also use a digital connection like AES-EBU or SPDIF or ADAT. Those are other kind of audio clocks or ways to get audio clock in. So most people now tend not to use sync. It could be more of a legacy workflow, but it's always good to be aware of it. And Steinberg was always kind of prided itself on having kind of the tightest synchronization for working with different, when it was locked to external timecode. And that's why so many film composers loved Cubase, is because their timecode was always coming from a video deck, and Cubase would always lock perfectly with that. So I would say that most people don't need to worry about sync now. Okay. right, so we see from Virtual HALion says, "Cheers, Greg. That's what I thought. Just wanted the guru to confirm. Love what you do to help us around the planet. Thanks." Thank you for the kind words. Always great to see Jazzy Lamel sending greetings and blessings. All right, so Soren says, according to my hunch, everyone has stopped getting Facebook UGC money in April 2025, but it could be wrong. If anyone could check their paid transactions, details, and distributions, it'd be cool. Yeah, be interesting to see. Okay. Okay. Reading through comments. Okay. We see Captain Energy Music on from outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Let's see, Captain Energy Music says, interesting face or maybe fact. Says, my buddy, whom I was a roommate with back in the mid-90s, also a music producer / DJ, named his cat Simpty. It says we had to explain that to a lot of people. Yeah. Jazzy just asking if the dog's name was Adat. All right, so you see Mark Rabin says, learning so much, refocus to Cubase. Sorry to distract, no problem. And Gerald Ely says, Adat Cat would be a good name. So. All right, so let me just go to we had a couple other questions that were mailed in. Let me get to those. All right, so you just see, says I have a problem when I'm using my MIDI keyboard. Sometimes the notes get stuck, sound in some type of buffer, and I have to wait until it stops or catches up with what was just played. Does this have anything to do with my settings in Cubase 13 Pro, or is it my laptop? So usually when stuff, is, so I would test to see if it's going to be, like the MIDI interface could make a big difference in this. Sometimes MIDI interfaces will buffer MIDI data. Usually it's not a problem. There's always kind of a virtual keyboard. If you hit Alt or Option plus K and see if you get the same results and you could trigger this by hitting like your keys on your keyboard, starting with like Q, W, E, R, T, Y. So you could come over here and hit the keys and see if you get stuck notes here. If you don't get stuck notes there, but you always get it on one particular like keyboard controller, if you have another controller of some type, see if that works. So my guess is, and if you're on Windows, if you come over to your studio menu, let's go to, we'll come here to your studio menu, to studio setup, and you'll go to MIDI port setup. On the Windows platform, you may see that there will be other options that you have here for, use system timestamp. So when you select your particular interface, you'll see kind of a series of options here Whether you want to use the MME drivers, WinRT drivers, use system timestamp, I would kind of toggle each of those settings and see if it resolves itself. It kind of sounds like a particular MIDI interface. And, there are a couple of, on the Windows platform, kind of different generations of MIDI driver protocols for interacting. And I think that if you know that's only going to be that one particular device, go to this window. It's not on the Mac platform. It's kind of a Windows specific issue, but check your WinRT, check your, use emulated MIDI ports. So there's some different MIDI settings that you can do, and I would try going through those settings. I'll try to see, and if you want, I could email you a screenshot of where to do that. I'll see if I could find and generate a screenshot maybe over the weekend and email you back. Next question that was mailed in. Is there a function in Cubase that only loads VST plugins when they are being used? I have a template that has several VST instruments, maybe 20. I only want to have them active if I'm actually using them in a song. Example, I have 4 synths in my song, but I'm only using one of them. Can I set it so that that is the only one that loads and the rest are not loaded? Should I just delete the original instruments when I'm done tracking if they're not used? Thoughts? So there is a preference for this, and this is one of the great things, features of VST3 plugins. So if we come over, just close this out, to your preferences, we can now just say, okay, I want to go to my VST. So we'll come over here to plugins, and then there's a little checkbox. And I think this is deactivated by default for suspend VST3 plugins on processing when the audio signals are received. So when no audio signals are received. So if there's no actual audio being generated by the plugin, it's not going to take CPU power. So just simply put a check mark next to that, and then that should take care of that issue for you. And I think the next question was mailed in. I may have got a disregard email just a couple minutes ago. Let me just check. Okay, so I think, yeah. So we won't go through that. All right. All right, let me go back, see if we have more real-time questions. Thanks for all the great questions. Again, you could always send questions in advance to clubcubase@steinberg.de. Okay, Uno Memento says we need a few more likes to hit 100. So if you're kind of liking what you're seeing here, make sure you hit the like button. Just go ahead and mute something here on my end. All right. So Mark Rabin says, funny story, when I first moved to Montana, my dog was named Montana. Got some wild looks. All right, Pro 5000 says, hello, sir. Can I import MIDI files to play as a pattern in chord pads? And how can I do that, please? So if we have chord pads, let's say we have our chord pads here. Let me just go to a different project. All right, and I'm just going to drag a MIDI loop over quickly. Okay, so let's say we have this particular MIDI loop here. Okay, and we want that to be on a chord pad so that when we play a particular chord that we hear it. So what I'm going to do is just take that MIDI event. So it doesn't import directly, so it's going to be like we can import a MIDI loop, but we could also just come here and drag. So let's go, we see the drop MIDI part pattern. So now I dropped that in, so just kind of drag and drop. And now when we play a particular pattern, so we could kind of come over here and just trigger particular patterns right here. So let's do something maybe a little. All right, so now we drag and drop. So now when I come over here, I'm just going to place Cubase into record. And now I triggered that original phrase, and that phrase has now been captured and recorded directly into Cubase, kind of right here. So that way, the actual chord, when I trigger it from the chord pad, the pattern is now being generated and captured in Cubase from that particular chord pad pattern. So again, just take that and drag and drop. Hang on 1 second. All right, sorry about that. All right, so you see Michael Teams has granted me and my family 1 gallon of fresh Texas strawberry ice cream. All right, we see inactive user on. All right, and inactive user says, question, if I accidentally overwrite a key command, how can I undo that? So usually if you overwrite, so you get prompted. So let's go to your edit menu to key commands. So let's say I want to come over, let's say bypass modulators, one we just added today. So I'm going to search for modulators. Okay, so let's say I put a key command in here. All right, now if I go to assign a key command that's in use, you'll get a message saying, basically this is already used by another key command, and we'll show you what that is. Do you want to reassign this existing key command? So if you know what the key command is, that you kind of messed up, one of the things that you could do is just click here in this little keyboard, and then you can just type the key command in, and that will reveal the particular parameter of that key command, like, so that you could modify it. But all you'd have to do, if you wanted to get rid of the key command altogether, you could just see this little trash icon, and then you could just come right over there and delete that key command or reassign it. All right. All right, Michael Teams wants everyone to smash the like button. Okay, reading through comments. Or you see Mark Raven says, hey, I've been exporting songs lately. I remember before the live streams I was never going to get what I wanted out of Cubase. Now I exceed my expectations daily. Grateful for this stream. That's great. Thank you for the kind words. Glad it's been helpful. Okay, Anthony Clark just says, hi Greg, question. When using Melodyne and sometimes the normal way, somehow when undoing it, it doesn't work properly, and I selected the extension from the info bar, but it doesn't show in the channel 2. Okay, so let's take a look. Okay, so sometimes when dealing with ARA extensions, so let's say we come here and we go to our let's see if we have extensions turned on here. All right, so let me just move my extension up one here. Okay, so we come here and we select, let's say I'll do Wavelab. Okay, so now when we double click, we're in Wavelab. So let's say if this is my active window and I undo, that will work here. But if I'm in Wavelab or other tools as a Melodyne extension, so let's say I come here and I want to do a fade out there. So if I switch my active window back to Cubase, we could see that it doesn't undo the process in the ARA extension. I think it needs to be selected, and then we use the undo history, within the application itself. So realize that when you're running as a program as an ARA extension, its edit history is kind of within itself and independent of what we see for the undo history and capabilities when using it as part, internally in Cubase. So we're kind of leaving the Cubase realm to go into like an ARA extension, and that will maintain its own key commands. It will maintain its own undo history that's separate and independent from the host application. So let me know if I misunderstood. All right, so you see Bob S. just says, as always, thanks for the Thanks for your valuable info. So always glad to help. Jazz Dude says chord pads and chord track are the best invention after sliced bread. All right, AJ just says when you import complex chord into chord pads, Cubase changes the chords. I can figure out how to stop Cubase doing this. So let me know if it's like changing. Okay, let me see if it's. So usually it doesn't. Let's say if I have. All right, let me just come over. So usually the chord track itself doesn't have much of an impact. So let's say if I want to come here, let's make a chord track from our piano part. Okay, so, and let's say at this point, so we have, let's say our chords here from our chord track, and I'm going to go to the chord pads. I'm just going to reread this one more time. So let's say we'll do, I want to, I think if we come over here, let's just choose to. All right, so we're going to assign the chord pads from the chord pads from the chord track. So we can see kind of our chords here. So let's just. All right, so if this particular track, you know, so sometimes you may not want like a particular track to follow the chord. So let's say if I do this with a D with the F sharp, but let's do a sus4 with the ninth chord. So usually the chord pads doesn't have any impact. Sometimes, you know, if we change this chord, and let's say if we have this particular track and we go to the chords page, you know, like maybe the track that we're extracting the chords from that we don't want to change, we would have it not follow the chord track. But now if I choose this to follow the chords, we may get this little message say, do we want to follow directly or synchronize track data from the chord track first? So at this point, we could just say, okay, I want to analyze the chords, you know, or we could just say follow directly. And then these particular notes will change. So I wouldn't do that if that's what you're kind of extracting the chord from. And this goes for the chord, you know, chords on a chord track, but not necessarily the, you know, if I change this chord here, it's not going to have any impact on the data, but chord, you know, the chords in a chord track can. So if you're starting and, you know, doing an analysis and creating chords from the event, I would choose to not have that follow chords. And as you work with other tracks, have it follow, if you want the other tracks to follow the chords of kind of your guide track, then have those tracks follow the chords. But you know, it's not going to change the actual notes from the chord pads that I've found, only from this. So just make sure that, you know, it's probably going to be the chord track that's actually modifying the MIDI events to match. But you could choose not to have it by going into chords inspector tab and just choosing off there. So let me know if I'm misunderstanding. All right, so inactive user just says if I want to import 2 tracks from another project and want the originally routing, how can I achieve that import tracks from another project? All right, so let's take a look. I'll just create a project. I want to make sure that the routing is good. Okay, so I want these 2 tracks here to be routed to a group. Okay, so I'm going to add a group track to select it. We'll call it inactive as our group. Okay, so I'm going to save this. So let me save the song. Just put it on my desktop and say okay, so these 2 tracks are routed out to this group. This track is routed to the stereo out. All right, so I'm going to close this. And what I want to do now is we'll come over here. I'm going to import those 3 tracks, including the group tracks. So I'm going to say import track archive. No, I'm going to say import tracks from project. We can go to the desktop. Okay, so now I want to have the chord track and those 2 tracks. We're going to make new tracks here. I'll say okay. So we'll see the track routing from here is going to this group. The track routing from this one is going to the group. So when you go to, if it's going to include the routing for an element, just make sure that when you go to import tracks from the project that you have the other particular tracks selected. So when you come over here, we need to have like the source and the destination routing, and then once you do that, then their routing will be preserved for you. So let me know if that's helpful. Okay. Okay, reading through comments. Thanks for all the great questions from everyone. Okay, I see Jazz Dude brings up a good point. Says the question on the chord pads is maybe it's the adaptive voicing, which changes the chord pads based on what is the master chord. So if I come over here, let's say we have this, and I change this particular chord, let's say to and let's just switch to like a different, so we could see, I'll just come over here, let's do our different voicings. So as we would, and if this is set to adaptive voicing, so if we come over, we could just simply, deactivate the voicings here. So, the adaptive voicings can have the voicings automatically carry over. So if we want to, let's say, select all of the tracks, we could I think, turn on and off the deactive voicing, the adaptive voicings. So check that out. That's a good call, Jazz Dude. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. Appreciate it. Apparently, I'm a cyborg chip. So. All right, so we see Phil Bartlett checking in from Australia. We know it's very early there. Thanks for joining us. Great to see you on again. Hope your control room is working as expected. All right, he has his coffee ready. Yeah, Phil Bartlett just says he remembers the notator dongle. It was a small brick, and it was the only part of the Atari computer that actually worked. So. Yeah, I think for the Atari dongles, I think it was the same factory that did the notator dongles and the Cubase dongles. So we always kind of had a sense of what their sales were compared to ours, because the company would tell us how much more we were selling of our program than theirs. So it's kind of interesting. Just because they're making more Cubase dongles than notator dongles. See, Uno Memento says he has a printer port dongle. So yeah, I remember when those were new. I had to defend it on CompuServe, on the CompuServe forums back in the day. All right, so Phil Bartlett says his control room's working perfectly, so that's great to hear. All right, so Nevos says how you have the reference window in the control room. All right, so how I set up like a reference track, because with reference tracks, we often don't want the particular reference track to go through the same kind of master processing. So let me open up a quick project here. Okay, so again, we don't want, like, if we have effects processing on our master section, which is typical, we don't necessarily want that to be applied to a reference track. So let's say in this example, I have a reference track, and we want to use this reference in a control room for our mix. So I created, what we could do is go to your audio connections, and then go to the control room, and I often make just a Q mix, the studio headphone mix, and I call it reference. So this will just kind of show up as reference. So what I could do now is I want to take this track. This track I don't want playing through the mix console. I don't want it to go through all the effects processing on my master channel. I want it to bypass all of that processing and just hear it direct. And so I'm going to select this particular track. We're going to send it to no bus for its output. And on the track itself, we'll just say, I'm going to send this track, we see our Q send tab here. And I'm going to send this out to my reference at 0 dB. Okay. And let's say on this track, I just want to make it sound different so I'm going to do a nasty EQ on it. So when we go to like our reference track here, so now when I go to QMix 1, this is my I get to listen to my mix versus the QMix. So that way we could just simply have different references as Q mixes and go back and forth without having to do all sorts of complicated routing. But the reference that you see there is just what I named the Q mix. All right, wonderful to see Michael Pierce on from Grand Chapel Studios in England. Hope you're doing well. All right, looks like we're at the end of questions. We'll see if more questions come in. I want to thank everyone for all the wonderful questions that have been asked. Hope everyone's learned a new tip or trick. I'll hang out for another couple minutes, see if there's other questions that cycle in. There's usually a delay from when I talk to you guys from when you hear it, but we'll see if there's. All right, so we see from Anthony Clark says, thanks for the clarification about the same topic. I tried to do the edits permanent, but the ARA extension doesn't show on that channel. It says no extension. Why are they not linked? Because you could have ARA extensions on certain events and not other events. So let's come over here. Let's create this. So let me just drop a couple audio files in. All right, I'll just give it a bit of space here. Okay, so let's say I am here and like maybe I don't want it on, so we see we have an extension here, but let me just come say, okay, I want a Wavelab extension on this clip and I want, let's say spectral layers on that clip. So this way we could have like different clips with different extensions on the same track. And then let's see if it's, let's see if there's a way, just so if we do, let's say a change here. I always do kind of track based, but it doesn't have to be. So let's say I just come over here and I will All right, and then let's see if I just do like a bounce selection. All right, let's see how we could. So then when it's selected here, we could go from the info line and say make extension permanent just directly, but this way, you know, so different events on the same track could go to different ARA extensions, and then when you select it here, that's when you could choose to make the extension permanent right there. So let me know if that makes sense, Anthony. Okay, so Michael Pierce has posted his tardy slip. So, all right, Sable Winters just asks a question: how do I set preferences to automatically color code tracks and groups on new projects? All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. So let's say so it's going to be just a preference here. All right, so, and we'll go to here to, so we want to go to preferences to user interface, and we'll see track and mix console channel colors. So a lot of times if I come over here, let's add a number of tracks. So I'm going to add a number of audio tracks, and the default setting would just give me like no colors. Okay. So what I like to set and how I change my preference is by going to the preferences here, and I say use previous track color +1. So now when I go to add a number of tracks, the colors will be incremented as we add multiple audio tracks. So we'll come over here, and now you can see that we get all the pretty colors on our tracks. So again, come over to your preferences or settings, user interface, track and mix console channel colors. You could have it all be the same. Use the last applied color. I just for variety, use previous track color +1. All right, so Bratman Studio says, hey, Greg, you know what I'm going to ask? So it's probably if I had a chance to listen to your song. So I didn't get a chance to. It's kind of been a total swamped week. My one night off this week, I had to do parent-teacher night at my son's school last night, and it was 3 hours long. But kind of swamped with a work project this morning up until the live stream started, till about 4 minutes before when I finished. So, but I will this weekend. I appreciate you sending the tracks. All right. So Michael Pierce has received 1 gallon of chocolate cherry mash ice cream from Michael Teams. Okay, so Flyv says he's all sorted out now, so it's great to read. Okay, Anthony Clark says that works. Didn't return to the info bar. Thanks. Okay, Michael Pierce says parent-teacher nights in the UK, they're not so much marathons as 30 sprints in a row. Yeah, this is kind of an odd one where they have like a very narrow entrance to the gym, and then for some reason they kept sending parents to and from the gym, and it was kind of over capacity getting in, so it took like 10 minutes to get in and 10 minutes to get out, and then, yeah, so could have been planned maybe a little better. All right, so see if we have any other questions. If not, we'll wrap up a little early. Again, I want to thank everyone for all the great questions. Appreciate all the great stuff, and hope you learned new tips and tricks. And if you have, make sure that you hit the like button and subscribe. We'll be doing this live stream again. If you're new to it, we do it on Tuesdays and Fridays starting at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. We usually go for 4 hours or until we run out of questions. Joe Ely says, great stream with lots to practice. Thanks, Greg. Everybody have a great weekend. All right, give it another minute or so. If not, we'll wrap up. All right, so it looks like we're all out of questions. Again, thank you for all the great questions. Always grateful to be a part of the community, helping people get able to use their Steinberg products better. Really appreciate everyone. Just such a wonderful community. I love being a part of. And we'll be back on Tuesday. Everyone, please stay safe and healthy, and we'll see you back on Tuesday at 1 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. Thank you and goodbye.